Hi, my name is Ken Rasmussen. I wrote the MicrobiomePrescription website, and today for a bit of a different style than my usual presentation, which is usually being focused on one new feature coming in or whatever. I'm going to take a look at what I could call a common sense approach to using microbiome prescription. Microbiome prescription has some challenges to it because often people are coming to it looking for a simple, easy to understand, one paragraph or even one sentence answer to a complicated situation. And that isn't always as available as they would like. Other cases, people dealing with very complicated situations or want to know all the details um, for them to figure out, according to their own philosophy, how to solve things. The purpose of microbiome prescription is to, as the motto says, just the facts. Gives you all the raw information without putting a spin on it or a influencer promises on it. It is trying to give you the facts as to what we actually know from studies and to do it in an unbiased and as much as possible uninterpreted thing, just the basic fact. It's up to you to come to your own conclusion or up to your professional working with you to come to your own conclusion. The goal is to get the facts. Simple and a simple thing. Okay, so, but let's suppose you come in and say, okay, today or this week, I've been feeling depressed, which is somebody just asked me that. I said, okay, what do you do? Where do you go? How does this site help you? Well, generally for a whole bunch of things, the easiest way without having a test, without having anything else, is to say, okay, is there a probiotic that will potentially help? And look up. Research probiotics by string available is there. We had constipation there, but let's suppose we work with the aspect which we have today called depression. And voila, we now have all the probiotics that can study depression. Now, these are specific strains, which is may or may not be available wherever you live. All these are strains which are technically available somewhere, and here's the name of the strains. But what I do or tend to do is look more at the species name. For example, Bifidobacterium. Okay, we have here. Oh, also have it here, and we have here. So we have 14, at least 14 studies. 15, 16. So we have 16 different studies where Bifidobacterium, ignoring the strain, were studied in terms of depression. Here you can go in and read the actual study if you want, but generally that caused me to say, okay, hey, you're dealing with depression, try taking Bifidobacterium. Simple as that. The second thing is, okay, what's the next most common? Next most common is Lactobacillus Helveticus. And we don't see any place else, which is not surprising because Helveticus is a reasonably rare probiotic, so it doesn't get that many studies. But for depression, it does get a stock of studies. So now what happens? Well, okay, I have two bits of, and there I say, okay, let's go and go to my fridge supply shop, and I'll show you that in a second. And in my fridge, I have a shelf with nothing but probiotics. And in you can see a whole bunch of them labels. Animus, Longum, Gersani, Genseni, Helveticus. That's one of which. And we have Longum there. So those were the two I would just take out of my fridge, which the probiotics have been refrigerated since literally 3 weeks after they're manufactured, so they are fresh. And we also have other things. We have, some people may recognize Mutaflor, which is E. coli probiotics. We have over here we have Semaphore 1 and Semaphore 2, and we have some other ones here. So I literally took over a fridge store full of probiotics. Now, your first response is, that costs a fortune. Actually not. Mutaflor, yeah, that's the cost of one Mutaflor canister is almost the same as the cost of all the others in combination. Um, and the catch, and the nice thing is all of this are relatively fresh probiotics. And the reason I know that is because of my source which I get it from. The source I get it from actually has a eBay seller, which is where I ordered, and basically you get there, and when I get it and we take a look at the flip side of it, you'll find the manufacture date, not the expiry date. Actually, you get both manufacture date and expiry date. And every time I've gotten a shipment from them, the manufacture date has been 2 or 3 weeks before I actually physically had the shipment in my hand, which means these are fresh live probiotics. Dropping them into either in a bag, or in my case I transfer the ones I tend to use into spare bottles and keep them in the fridge. Now the thing is, it's been years since my last shipment. I tried one of them this morning, and within 24 hours I can notice the difference in amount of gas and stool that the probiotic is having an impact. It is changing the microbiome with noticeable effects, either difference in amount or volume of farts coming out, I hate to say it, but it is a legitimate measure, and change the shape and texture of the stools. So I know that the probiotics are indeed living alive, which makes me very happy because, okay, they're sitting there, I have them whenever I need, and go through there. Also, you notice, or you may have noticed, my usual thing is just checking out a product for 2 weeks and then change something else. When you have a rich collection like this, that's not a problem. It's go from one to the other. Now, as for cost, well, here we have 25 grams, which is a good amount of probiotics, going for what, $10? Usually, when you go and get that amount of probiotics, you're looking at $50 often. And that is off the retail shelf, and they may have been in storage somewhere, perhaps even in an unrefrigerated warehouse for weeks or months or years before they put out on the shelves in a refrigerated display saying, hey, these are being kept fresh. However, the past history from date of manufacture all the way through shipment until finally somebody places on the store is not necessarily refrigerated. Some stores do refrigerate, some stores do not refrigerate, and if you are dealing with a large chain, chances are they are not going to be refrigerated. So here, by ordering on this eBay provider, I get the probiotics very fast. If it's something which I know I'm going to be using often, then I simply get a larger quantity. So for $10, I get 25 grams. If I go up to 50 grams, wait a minute, the second. 25 grams was $10. Double the amount is 16. That doesn't cost that much more. Let's go up to 100 grams. I can get 4 times as much of a probiotic by spending just twice as much. Now, that has caused me to fall in love with this provider, because basically you're not paying for bottling or shipping. You're paying for the probiotic, and the probiotic comes directly from their factory, fresh, sent to you, which is absolutely, this is not a paid advertisement. I love it because it is the ideal situation. Good cost, low cost. Hence, I think my first order from them came up to $110, and that was a massive number of different probiotics, as in something like, because at that amount they actually gave me a 20% discount, so I think I ended up with somewhere close to 15 to 20 individual strains of probiotics. Absolutely lovely. Makes it easy for me to adjust or do things depending on wherever I am, or where somebody wants some help, I can just go and do it. Okay, so we have it there. We can go over and look at other things. So if you have something like allergy, and just click update, and there we have the same thing. We have Rhamnosus GG, we have 70 studies. So number one choice is Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. Now GG is very easy to get, but actually the provider is Culturelle. But if you don't have any good results with that or whatever, then you can go and look at the next one. Next one down is Lactis, and then Breva, and then we have KC, and we even have old friend Mutaflora. So you can just go and get a list of priority of probiotics to try. If it has no effect, just move down to the next one, or do two of them at the same time. So this is the first level. Nice and easy. Just type in the word you're looking for, and you have the links to the studies, and you also see how many of each particular one is being studied. And all of these are retail available somewhere in the world. Not necessarily in where you're living, but they are available somewhere in the world. One. But they're also, if you ignore the strain, they can give you a guidance as to which probiotic is likely to be most studied for a particular condition. Okay, so that's path one. That's an easy way. Path number two is going over here, and we have medical symptoms. And let's take a look, try the same thing. Let's try the word depression. And we have depression disorder here. This isn't as necessarily sweet, but what it does give you is you can go in and look at the bacteria involved, and you can see there is a lot of bacteria depressed. And for example, here we have one bacteria which most studies shows it's being low. We can also take a look and go up and within the page just look for something like Bifido. And there we see which ones. Hey, interesting. We see adolescents and Bifidum all reported high. However, Breve is low, which means Breve is a natural first choice, and Longum is another one which, well, two of the three cases is low. And if you may remember, Bifidobacterium was one of those which we saw on our prior screen. And let's take a look at Lactobacillus. And then we have all the Lactobacillus here. And we see, same one which we had on the last screen, Helveticus is low. So expressing associated with that, we have other things which are low. In fact, Lactobacillus as a whole are low. And we have additional choices there. So the question is, we have a whole bunch of single items here. When we go to the research, we get the individual names, cross-reference the number of studies done on it as a intervention, which gives you a stronger guidance. However, that's not the only aspect. If we go back here, we take a look at all those bacteria, and we can now use our expert system engine to say, okay, what should you be taking or what should you know. This is, again, all done a priori, that is without actually using a microbiome test. So it is sort of, okay, you have the symptoms, you want to deal with it, you may have already done a test or haven't got the results, or you not sure you want to do a test, whatever. This will give you the list of items there, and it spells out things. For example, iron supplement is number one choice. Iron supplement for depression, to me, is very logical. Why? Because iron is a key factor for delivering oxygen in the blood system, and depression is associated with having low oxygen, low saturated O2 levels. So its first dosage sitting there is idea. You also notice that I even give the dosages, or based on studies, how much. And then we have other things there. For example, high protein, rare meat goes together. Ketogenic diet, etc. So we have there. But the other thing we have is what can increase depression. High dietary fiber can increase it or can cause the bacteria which are low there. Some cases you even get surprised, like Lactobacillus plantarum. A lactobacillus actually can make depression worse. We also have Bifidobacterium, which is a bit of a surprise. But the problem is that when we are dealing with a host of bacteria, we don't know how much weight to give to each one. When we deal with a sample, we can then get estimated weight for that one. So it's there, but it is not the ideal um, solution again because we are one case we're looking at probiotics alone, another case we are looking at probiotics in the context of a whole bunch of different bacteria, and that probiotics will influence other bacteria in different ways, and it just becomes horribly more complicated. Okay, so that is the top two aspect, which is coming in and finding out a probiotic to take, to um, taking a look at the bacterial shift and seeing if any of the common probiotics are listed as being too low, in which case then it's just clear what you want to do is you want to take those. Candidate is a little bit more hit and miss because it will look at all these bacteria, in this case it's a massive number, and try to do it, but it doesn't have the guidance for the relative amount of different bacteria, or at least doesn't let, I may end up doing some program changes to improve that. And test ranking over here is a feature if you haven't done a microbiome test. It gives the okay, remember we have a whole list of different bacteria identified. How many of these are identified on the test? Well, we have 405, about 86%. We have monocyte down to 72%, so it doesn't identify as many of the bacteria known to be factors. So you can go on down the list and take a look at some of the ones if you're dealing with depression. Just basically don't give you very many of the tests. For example, let's take a look at common one such as GI. Uh, let's GI map. It only identifies 14%. In other words, it will not show abnormalities for more than 1 in 7 of the bacteria which studies have shown are connected with depression. In other words, if you're dealing with depression, a GI map is not a particularly informative one. It only going to report abnormalities in 1 of the 7 bacteria shifts which are reported from studies. So that is it. Okay, now those are the two things. The information from studies is we actually it's similar to here, but this is from Citizen Science. And we go in here and we can now go in and find depression. And I need to probably implement a search okay, somewhere in there we probably have okay, this I need to improve the search area. There we go, general depression, click here, and voila, we now have some of the characteristics. So we have bifidobacterium as a whole tends to be high, but let's just search because we may want to. Bifidobacterium is high, so oh, what we have here is a warning up top. We have one case it is high, another case it is low, and that is an oddball case, but it does happen. And what it means is that the frequency of being seen may be low, but when it's seen, the amount is high. The average amount is high. So it's because there's something wacky in how the Bifidobacterium happens in the gut of people with depression and other people, which ends up being there. Also notice that only Bifidobacterium is one of those which there's only 9 there. We have longum, we have adolescents, etc. We have breve, which is also low. So we have some overlap, but the breve only is low. The longum is low and high, and that is this oddball characteristic, which unfortunately does occur, which is that the frequency of detection may be very low or very high, but the average amount doesn't correspond. It is in the opposite direction. The average amount may be low and the frequency is high, or the frequency is low and the amount is high. In other words, it doesn't show up very often, but when it does show up, it's walloping huge amounts. So the result is the amount goes high. Now we can also go over and take a look at Lactobacillus. And we don't find Lactobacillus having any association to depression according to this particular one. And this is biome site. Let's go over and take a look at Thrive. And let's try the same thing. Different labs report bacteria differently. Lactobacillus fermentum is high, okay, which is not particularly. I mean, you can get it as a supplement. I have it as a supplement, but if you're dealing with depression, you don't want more of it. And we can do Bifido. Bombay is high, and that's it. So that's it for 5. And let's go over to uBiome. And again, we do the same thing. Nope, nothing for Bifido. Nothing for Lactobacillus. Again, different labs report bacteria differently, and the citizen science identify based on the lab results whether or not it is significant. So we have another way of doing it. This way is more complicated. I say it is based on individual labs. So if you're using that lab, it can be helpful. But you have to keep in mind what is the taxonomy nightmare before Christmas, which is that each lab reports bacteria differently with different names, even if they are using the same digital file which comes from a sequencing machine. Not different parts, done different samples or different parts of a physical sample. Single sample processed through a sequencing machine gives something called a FASTQ file. The FASTQ file is now interpreted by different labs, and each lab interprets it differently. And all the research studies use different methods too, so they also get different namings for the same thing, which is part of what I call the nightmare before the taxonomy nightmare before Christmas, because that's when I wrote the first article, which was just before Christmas, and couldn't resist the play on words. Okay, now we could go on and take a look at doing it with your actual sample. And the apple sample is a little bit more complicated. I'll do one quick look. So I'm logging in with somebody who is prone to depression on occasion. And we have the latest results here. And actually this new one. So we could go and just give the everything, but let's go over beginner symptoms. And let's see if we can find depression in there. There we have depression. And guess what? 79% agreement, 79th percentile. In other words, roughly 4 out of 5 people have less matches than she does for the depression model. So we could just take that one little thing by itself. And we also can mark general depression down here, which probably be the same. And now we can go in and mark things there. We'll drugs, non-drugs, common over-the-counter on antibiotic, etc. And now we're just going to go in and get suggestions. And here we have the 19 bacteria that are associated with depression from our citizen science studies. And now we can go down here and see what the suggestions are. And we can also take a look. Oops, sorry. Okay, and we have up here at the okay, I supposedly have there it is. We have the consensus here, and then the consensus I can go down and ask about Bifido, and there is if I spell it correctly, it helps. And guess where? This person, Bifidolongum. It's high on the priority list. Surprise, surprise, surprise. And the other one was Lactobacillus. Excuse me. Combination of Helveticus and Ramosis is suggested, and then Helveticus by itself. So this person who is prone to depression ends up having on their suggestion list the exact same probiotics from a very first method, which is just looking up the person saying what probiotics has the most study with. And to my surprise, actually not surprised because I keep seeing this too often, almost unbelievable, that guess what? The top Lactobacillus probiotic is the same one which was suggested before. Top Bifidobacterium was the same one as won't happen necessarily with your sample, but it does indicate that the methodology that the expert system is using seems to be in agreement with reasonably expected results. So that is there. Now let's try going back to the home page and let's go down and go over to a different way. PubMed studies. And in this case, we don't have any matches. In other words, that is a which does happen. And now the last way is going over and using KEGG analysis, which is looking not at the person specifically, but is looking at probiotics which are overproducing or underproducing, and let's see what we come up there. I know we have the list, and let's see what we have here. Let's see where we have Bifido. Oh, what do you know? Top Bifido is Bifidolongum. Again, we have agreement. And this, as I said, this was totally ad hoc, and it actually surprises me how well it is. But top Bifidobacterium is the same one which we got from our absolutely know nothing about on the microbiome list. And let's try Lactobacillus. We have Reuteri there, and we see Helveticus there, and it is pretty close to the top of the list. So, how should I say? We have done 3 or 4 or 5 different ways of trying to figure out which probiotics to use. And believe it or not, they keep coming down to the same combination based on a priori. I know nothing about my actual microbiome to actually using my microbiome sample and seeing what is suggested, looking at all of the bacteria involved. And guess what? It comes out with the same set of answers for which probiotics across there. So at this point in time, I think I'll shut up, get this video online, and more importantly, share it with the person whose sample I used, who I think is going to be mightily impressed and probably, hopefully, no longer depressed. So instead of being impressed, and being depressed, they will hopefully, sorry, instead of being depressed, they hopefully be impressed. Okay, bad pun. It's late in the day. That's it.